Hello, friends. It's John Woods, the CTO at the Algorand Foundation, here with Verifiably Random episode number 3. Can't believe we're this far along already. And I'm here with my co-hosts and colleagues, Min Wei
Hi, everyone. Good to see you.
and Marc Van Leberg.
Hi, everyone.
So today we have an action-packed and I think quite interesting podcast for you. Today we're talking about the intersection of artificial intelligence and blockchain. I think this is not only a hot topic at the moment, but also one that's technologically gripping, because really it talks about the intersection of so many different disciplines and technologies. And there's a number of different ways we can look at this. And so we're going to explore it together today with our experience on the blockchain side. And then a little later in the episode, we're going to have a special guest who comes at it from a slightly different angle. So, guys, tell me, AI and blockchain, are you bullish?
My P Doom, is that what you're asking for? The P Doom? I'm bullish for sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I have to say, I don't think I know enough about it to be super sophisticated. So that's why I'm super looking forward to this episode and then chatting more about it.
How about you, Marc? What do you think?
Very cool. I think it's super cool. I think, of course, AI is eating the world, as we all know. But I think there's really interesting use cases of how AI intersects with blockchains and how blockchains can help. And so I think it's a very, very cool and interesting area to explore.
Sure. So, I thought what might be useful, and I'm not an AI or ML engineer, but I am a hobbyist, and I thought maybe what I could do, just from my techie background, is give people an overview of the fundamentals of AI and what that means before we kind of explore things. The intersection of things like AI and blockchain. I think as well, if you look at progression across the industry, I think some of the things that are worth kind of calling out, Microsoft, I think it's got Phi as their model. I think it's quite interesting. You got Meta, they've released Llama 3, which is a text generation model, an LLM, like ChatGPT style. You've got OpenAI and all the cool things that they're doing around ChatGPT 4 and later ChatGPT 5. And you also have latent diffusion models. So these image generation models, which are becoming more and more popular. Mid-Journey, I think, is an example, of course. DALL-E is an example. Stable Diffusion, another example. So I think right now, all the hotness is in generative AI, AI that makes things for you, text and images. But we're also seeing things like Sora, which is generation of videos using AI. So, okay, let me just jump into this at a really high level. We've talked before about how blockchains are essentially distributed ledgers, a copy of a ledger that's on many computers at the same time, and we have these computers connected, all running the same core software. That's how networks like Algorand work, Bitcoin, Cardano, etc. So if you looked at if you looked at AI under the hood, what would you see? What are the kind of core components of AI? How does one get to the point where AI is generating a bedtime story for your kids, or indeed generating party invitations, as I did using DALL-E for my 40th birthday only 2 weeks ago? Okay, so the answer is AI, just like many regular applications on a computer, starts as code. And so most of these libraries, or maybe I'll keep it even more simple, most of the tools that you use to write AI code, which is the start of your journey into writing any type of artificial intelligence, are actually written in our favorite language, Python. Of course, you'll be familiar with this. We launched Python support on Algorand only in the last couple of months, and it's been very successful. And so the language of AI is already available on Algorand to help build your apps on Algorand. But of course, in the world of AI, in the context of AI, we use Python in a different way than blockchain apps. And so there's a couple of different tools, notably, if you want to look into them. TensorFlow is one from Google. PyTorch is another. And these tools, they help you write the code that describes, the core DNA of the AI. So, as an example, if you wanted to build a model that was able to tell whether something was a cat or not a cat, you'd start with one of these tools and you'd build up your code in what is the source of the AI model. And so when you're finished writing that source, you'd have a couple of hundred lines of code. And inside that, you're equipping the model to be able to take information and be trained on that information. Now, many of you will have heard of the idea of AI training or training models or GPU training. And so this is step number 2. You take the AI model that's written in, human readable English, albeit Python code, and then you need a large data set. And so what is that? It's either a collection of images, tons of text from the internet, like all of Wikipedia, all of Reddit, various forums around the internet, etc. You take a ton of this training data, and it has to be relevant to the types of things you want to train your model on. And so in our example, where it's differentiating maybe cats from other animals, you need bunches of images that are both of cats and not of cats. And you need to have them labeled so that the AI can see lots of examples of the topics on which you're trying to train it. But if you take something more sophisticated like ChatGPT, it is trained on everything from source code documentation and technical documentation all the way to images of things and to other more abstract concepts. Okay, so when you train your model, what comes out of the process of training, so that is the inputs are the AI code and all of the data. What comes out of that is your neural network or your model. And these neural networks are kind of similar to a human brain in a way. They are a bunch of connections between, in the case of the models, floating point numbers that are inside the model, but it kind of replicates the neural structure of a brain. And then when you want to use your ChatGPT or your newly trained cat model at runtime on a computer, you use both the source code that you originally wrote. You don't need the data anymore, but you do need that trained model, which is essentially a brain, a digital brain that you have created using your training data. And then that's it. Now you have an AI that can generate images or generate you text. And that's essentially how AI works.
Thank you, Professor John.
You're welcome.
So I heard the description recently that I thought was quite interesting. And basically, it was an AI scientist that was talking about what's now specific about this. And he basically said, if you think about it in the simplest possible terms, AI is nothing more than statistics, because what an AI does, and in the case of an LLM, it basically uses kind of statistical models to estimate what is the most probable next word that it needs to answer in kind of an LLM context. And the thing that's specific about these large language models is that with this new transformer architecture, they have figured out that the quality of your AI will scale linearly with the amount of data and the amount of compute you throw at it. And that's why now suddenly these models are becoming huge, because the bigger they are, the more reliable and the better they become. And so that has then given, that has led to kind of this creation of these LLM type of models, which I thought was an interesting way to kind of look at that.
It is. In fact, if you were to look under the hood of a model, like you rip off the top and look under one of these trained models, you're right. It is just numbers. It's a bunch of floating point numbers when it comes out of the oven. And then we use a process called quantization so that it's able to run on your MacBook. And that's the idea, that you make the number less precise. So you use a smaller, like an integer or an 8-bit integer or a 4-bit integer, rather than using, say, a 16-bit floating point number. But it is just numbers. And as you say, there's inputs and there's outputs. You put a question on the inputs, it tingles the neurons and it fires neurons on the outputs, and then it predicts, as you say, the words. But what I think is maybe interesting is, because that's, of course, a simplification, but one could also say human beings are the same thing. Electrical signals hit my eyes, I hear the words, tingles my ears, and my brain interprets those things. And so I wonder, at what point do the neural networks become sentient?
Well, we have human beings, like every one of us we've helped train these models, right? I mean, if we think about all the CAPTCHAs that we've done, is this a stair? Is this a car? Is this a light? We're basically helping to train those models, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, depending on, I'm not sure when I click those buttons where that information goes, but potentially you're right. We could be classifying images.
I think we've been used by already.
I think it's interesting, right? Because there's a lot of, if you think about the whole broad space of AI, there's a lot of challenges that people talk about, like from policy perspective to data security to it. And that maybe could lead us to our next topic, which is how does kind of AI and blockchains intersect? And the way I think about this, like this is two-way street, right? Like AI can help blockchain, blockchain can help AI. And so maybe you can talk a little bit about that intersection between the two, and where do we see use cases emerging that are useful? And so, John, what do you think? Is how does blockchain help AI?
Yeah, so there's some very interesting use cases here. Maybe before I even touch on that, I want to talk about how one community member, MG, has helped us using AI. So MG has taken a ChatGPT, so a basic model of ChatGPT, of course, very powerful and very general, knows about everything, but maybe only knows a little bit about Algorand, and he has fine-tuned or further trained that to know all about Algorand. He's also made an incredible backend that the AI can talk to, i.e., kind of a service that it can hit and ask questions. So if you use the Algorand ChatGPT plugin, you can ask the AI all kinds of questions, including about the contents of blocks. So very cool. Check it out. But yeah, back to your question. How does blockchain help AI or AI help blockchain? Maybe before I answer, I'll just quickly say there's one extra kind of a jargon that I have to explain. People talk about billions of parameters and parameters around AI models. And I just wanted to tell people a little bit of background on that. Within the models, of course, I mentioned that there's inputs, there's outputs, there's various, I guess, how can I express it simply? Data points within the model. And the number of parameters kind of corresponds to the sophistication of the model. So you'll hear people say an 8 billion parameter model or a 13 billion parameter model. Or in the case of ChatGPT, they estimate it's about a 400 million or 500 million parameter model. And so, or sorry, billion, not million, billion. And so these, this gives people a flavor for how sophisticated the model is. So generally speaking, a 500 billion parameter model will, of course, produce more nuanced output than, say, a 10 billion parameter model. But the types of models that have hundreds of billions of parameters, they need to run on huge data centers or into huge data centers and not on your computer at home. So maybe I'll kick off the conversation with my favorite use case for how blockchain can help AI. I think blockchain helps train AI. So I've just mentioned about how running models is hard, right? You got to run huge models in big data centers with hundreds of GPUs. Training models is even harder. So this process of taking the original code and producing the neural network. So I believe there's a very powerful use case where AI could where AI could meet blockchain, and blockchain could help train these gargantuan multi-hundred billion parameter models, all in a decentralized context. So you don't need one big data center. You just leverage all the computers all over the world already running decentralized nodes in blockchain networks.
But the idea there is like it's an infrastructure project. It's like a DeepIn, right? Would it be like a DeepIn project where people basically put up give access to their NVIDIA GPUs, and then these GPUs form a decentralized network that people can use? Is that the idea?
Right. So the implementation architecture would probably require extra software that would harness the power of those local assets, as you say, these local GPUs and people's computers, etc. Or there could be dedicated hardware that you ship out in a more of a traditional DeepIn approach. But yes, very much that.
Because I think it's
Yeah,
also interesting because I think if you think about like the amount of money it takes to actually build one of these foundational models, it's like it's only accessible to really the biggest companies in the world. And so how do you kind of democratize that, and how do you make sure that startups in the AI space can actually build their own models without having to spend $100 billion? And so that's where it becomes interesting, right? Because also if you buy these GPUs, you probably don't need them like 100% of the time. So you can make them available to a broader community like for a portion of time, and then have blockchain kind of like enable that.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. I was going to say there are projects out there that are doing like exactly that. It's like decentralizing the compute. Projects like, Akash or Fetch AI. I think they're like kicking off this, this revolution, if you will, of decentralized compute. But I think there's also a very strong component of just censorship resistance, right? When you are able to run these models across a decentralized network, and the power that brings to AI. I mean, especially in light of the criticisms around OpenAI and how it is a centralized entity, etc.
Well, yeah, very much so. And Marc and you, by the way, Min and you yourself and Marc make great points. Marc, on your point, what is open source here? I mean, sure, the models are open source, but we just said the data is the most important thing and the hardest thing. The data sets are not open sourced, and indeed they do open source the trained model. Okay, all the numbers, the floating point numbers in the big box. But what's as you just said, Marc, it costs hundreds of millions or tens of millions of dollars to produce that thing. And so, can we keep expecting Meta and other companies like Meta to keep just giving the trained model out for free? I don't think so. And to Min,
This,
to you tell me
yeah,
more.
go ahead. So I think this is other area to me. If you, there's a lot of criticism in the industry around, especially from content providers, right? Because these models need a huge amount of data.
Mhm.
So these big foundational models are basically ingesting this data from the likes of the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and all the publishers, and it's like, and they're using it to create these phenomenal models. But what is that fair to those content providers? Is that fair to all the publishers? So could blockchain basically help with like data provenance to kind of track what data is being ingested, but also figure out maybe a monetary arrangement where in a decentralized way, the publishers could get rewarded for providing data to these gigantic models.
Totally.
Yeah, and there's like a trust element to it too, right? John, you and I have briefly talked about this in one of our past conversations around like there's a lot of questions around what's real and what's not, and so this idea of provenance and identity and trust, I think for sure is an area that blockchain can play a very important role for sure.
Okay, and so I totally hear you, and I think Min as well. So I think we brought up some interesting ones there. The first, being the distributed training of models, so you can train more complex models without requiring massive data centers. The distributed inference of models, where you're using them and paying token, having maybe a token around that. We've got the ability to tokenize the information that's being used, or to certainly pay royalties on the information that's being used, as Marc says, in order to level the playing field. And then, as you say, Min, and I think maybe a very, very important one that's dear to my own heart is the censorship resistant aspect that you bring up. I think it's important. And so this is the idea that access to these models, is it appropriate that the public have access to these powerful technologies? I mean, in the 90s, the United States tried to ban cryptography globally. Or not globally, but certainly the export of it. Then they classed it as weapons, and that was a whole drama. And so I think maybe blockchain can help democratize access to these models. And maybe it's time to bring in our very special guest. AI helps blockchain, blockchain helps AI. No one better to speak about it than David Johnston from the Morpheus Project. Morpheus is at the forefront of blockchain and AI, and it's also a project that includes Eric Voorhees, a very prominent individual who's a cypherpunk and someone who's been in crypto for a long time. Very excited to speak with David Johnston now, so let's bring him on and we can get his view on this and see what he thinks of our use cases. David, thanks so much for joining us. So good to see you again. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. I'm at a cafe hanging out here in beautiful Austin, Texas.
I've
That's
been
great.
once,
Love
actually.
Austin.
Yeah, it's good. So, on Verifiably Random episode 3, we were just chatting away about the intersection of AI and blockchain. We chatted a little bit about how it starts off as a model and gets trained with data, and then of course we talked a little bit about the sophistication of various models, the parameter sizes, and then Marc and Min and I were chatting about the intersection of blockchain and AI, i.e., how does blockchain help AI, and how does AI potentially help blockchain? And we thought no one better to speak to than you, working on decentralized open source AI. So Morpheus, the revolution will not be centralized. Tell me more.
Absolutely. So, that's the big passionate thing for me is I think everyone deserves a personal AI where they control their data, it's connected to their Web3 wallet, and it's on their side, right? It's not working for a company. It's not working for a big government. It's their personal AI. For the same reason you want a personal phone or you want a personal computer, you're going to want a personal AI. And I think that's the direction we're headed. And the only way to get there is with fully open source and decentralized technology. So you guys probably saw Llama 3 just dropped recently, which was a huge deal, right? Because it puts open source on par for the first time with like ChatGPT 4, right? The gold standard today of open source models. And so it's really becoming more and more powerful to use the open source version of these tools. And I can now run that on my own computer, right? I can run it in a peer-to-peer network. I can, run it on the GPU for a fraction of the cost of what proprietary, closed source, restricted models like, OpenAI are charging 10 times as much for their API, but it no longer has a moat, right? The open source community has very quickly caught up with the proprietary players. And that's the exciting thing for me. And that's sort of been the vision of the Morpheus community, is to put a personal AI in the hands of everyone, right? That's how we get a free future, right? It's not one controlled by a couple of small, groups of people at a big tech company or at a government, but distributing the power to every individual, because everybody has different preferences and different biases and different, things they want to accomplish. The mistake would be to try to centralize all that into a couple of entities instead of having diversity of personal AIs that people can use.
How do you see this play out from like a Morpheus perspective? Because if you think about like the AI landscape, it's getting to be very complicated, right? From like the basic infrastructure layers to then the foundational models to the middleware to like the apps that run on top of it. Like it's a very, very complicated landscape. So where do you see kind of Morpheus fit into that landscape?
So Morpheus is really a platform, very much akin to like an Ethereum. What Ethereum is to smart contracts, Morpheus is to smart agents, right? So it's not building the agents, it's giving them the tools, the compute that they need, access to capital, the connections to the APIs and the smart contracts, right? And just enabling people to publish whatever smart agent they want, right? And you can think of smart agents as the application layer, right? The foundation model is the operating system, right? It understands intent. It can grok like what people are trying to accomplish and do, and then connect it to the right application, to the right smart agent that can do that task. So think of agents as taking action versus the model is giving you information, right? But ultimately, if we want 1 billion people to use crypto, I just want to say something simple like, hey, I'd like to stake my ETH, right? Imagine I'm the average user. I've never heard of Lido. I don't know what the smart contracts are, but it can understand my intent. Okay, it's going to set up the transaction, right? It can handle all of the connections to the smart contracts, and I just push a button on MetaMask and approve the transaction. Yes, that's the amount I want to do. Yes, that's what I'm intending, right? And I think that's the right flow, right? Where the user expresses intent, right? Something they want to accomplish. And here the machine is understanding that natural language and giving them an output, a real outcome, right? And they're approving that, right? That's the user flow that got 1 billion people on the web, right? It was when Google showed up and there was a magic box. You could just tell what you wanted to find, and it popped up the best of the internet, right? At least back in the day when it was sort of a neutral platform and would fairly rank the websites, right? And so we need that for crypto as well. We need that layer that makes it so easy that the average person can show up with no technical background and really use it. So that's a lot of what you can think of Morpheus is that coordinator or delegator agent that understands the intent, that maps it to these applications, and can make Web3 easy for anyone.
And so Morpheus kind of acts like a translation layer then between the LLM and the function call. Is that essentially correct?
Yeah, that's a good way of thinking about it. But it does more than that in the sense that it has an incentive framework for rewarding compute providers, rewarding coders, rewarding people deploying the actual smart agents, rewarding people providing capital and liquidity because you need payment rails. Like that's the big barrier all these proprietary guys are going to run into is they don't do tokens. They can't touch Web3. They haven't figured out a wallet in 2024. Let alone the rest of this infrastructure. And so decentralized AI has the opportunity to run ahead and do all of these actual, tasks on behalf of somebody, not just give them information about the task, but actually go and do it.
So there's a deepened component to your project as well, which is you basically get infrastructure providers to provide their compute, and then you reward them for it. That's part of your vision of how to bring this to life.
Yeah, and that's approaching very quickly. It looks like the testnet for compute will go live in May, in just a few weeks. And so there's a great member
Yeah.
of the community, Ryan Condron, who built the Rumorin protocol, had already created a marketplace for decentralized hash power. It's like, hey, I can repurpose this for inference, for running AI models, right? It's the same framework for paying people and matching providers, right? So you can think of Morpheus sort of as an abstraction layer, right? It's not a compute network, right? Akash and BitTensor, there's a lot of great players doing that. Morpheus is on the other side. It's the demand side of the market. It's consuming those models. It's consuming that inference, right? So that's sort of the next phase, the homestead phase, if you will, of the network will be when all those compute rewards go live. But the frontier phase it's been in right now is when the capital rewards have gone live. So the response from the community has been incredible. The fair launch started on February 8th, and $400 million of staked ETH flowed into the project. And it's sort of a really sort of brilliant mechanism where it just donates the yields from that staked ETH, and people keep their principal, right? And that avoids all the centralization. There's no treasury. You're not trusting anybody with your money. You can withdraw your ETH whenever you want. And so I think the question for a lot of people was, well, I'm going to hold ETH anyway. I might as well support a cool open source project that I want to exist with the yield, right? And so that became sort of a no-brainer. And it was amazing to see how many people have supported the effort.
David, I think there's just so many layers within Morpheus that's all about like kind of embracing this ethos of open source, decentralization, et cetera, in a way that you're bringing that whole thing. I mean, I don't want to say that you're bringing the whole thing from blockchain into AI, but I feel like that was sort of like the fundamental aspect of how you want to think about Morpheus. But I do want to see if you can help us understand, why did you guys decide that it was important to launch Morpheus as a blockchain network, or with these incentives on crypto? What is it about blockchain that really made you do this?
Fundamental solution to the OpenAI problem, right? They started as a nonprofit. It was supposed to be open source. It was supposed to be neutral. And what happened? In order to scale, they sold out to Microsoft. They took the $30 billion. They became a for-profit. They closed sourced all of their technology and become almost the opposite of what they had started out as. And so you have to give people a path to stay open source and stay decentralized, but monetize what they're doing, right? And scale their infrastructure. And if you look at the crypto ecosystem, what we have is compute, right? There is 50 times as much compute as was mining Ethereum as was used to train GPT-4. Like, if we point a fraction of the GPUs in crypto towards AI, it will create the world's best models. And that's the path it's on.
This is, for me, an interesting thing. So I get the idea of decentralized inference, and it's cool. And by the way, I use Llama 3. I use an 8-bit quantized version of 70 billion parameters. It runs on my M1 Pro with 96 gigs of RAM, and it's happy days. And with WireGuard, i.e. a VPN and a UI front end on your iPhone from GitHub, you basically have a free ChatGPT-4 in your pocket. It's really cool. But I do wonder about this, man. They've open sourced the model. But they haven't open sourced the training set. And then, of course, the model that they give, like the weights, effectively the weights that they provide on Hugging Face, that's the training output, which has cost people like Meta, tens of millions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars. It sounds like what you're saying is we do need to get to a place where we're training in a decentralized manner. And I think that's something I support, because I don't know how sustainable it is that those models like Llama 3, Llama 4, Llama 5 keep getting given out for free, especially ones with I think Llama 3 goes up to 400 billion parameters or something. It's costing Meta a ton. I know there's some kickback, but do you think, is Morpheus going to take it to a place where it's not just decentralized inference, but also decentralized training?
I think so, but again, Morpheus is creating an incentive layer for other people to do that, right? So BitTensor is focused on training models, right? And Akash is focused on doing decentralized inference, and there's Hyperbolic and tons of other groups. What Morpheus is doing is just providing the incentive, and whoever does it most efficiently wins, right? It's infrastructure agnostic, and it's worth saying that while Morpheus is launching as smart contracts on Ethereum and Arbitrum, it's chain agnostic, right? Wormhole and Layer 0 have already been added to the contract, so it's going to get deployed on Solana, and just about every other EVM and layer 2
And
you can
Algorand.
imagine.
He just promised
Yeah,
Algorand.
yeah.
I just heard it. That was Algorand right there.
Yeah,
Thanks,
yeah,
thanks,
yeah,
David.
yeah, exactly. So, that's the dream. And keep in mind, there's no Morpheus company. There's no Morpheus Foundation. There are 200 open source contributors all over the world, half of which are anonymous. The original paper authors were anonymous, right? So this is a fully decentralized thing. Like we're all Morpheus, right? Anybody that wants to be part of it and in the community can provide capital or compute or code or build smart agents and websites and get rewarded by this ecosystem. And that's really unique, right? I haven't seen a lot of protocols that have such a focus on rewarding the community of people actually building on the platform, not just capital, not just compute, right? Not just proof of work, proof of stake, but actually focusing on the builders. I mean, I think something like the early days of Ethereum is a good, analogy. I know you guys have done a ton of that as well. You have to build and in rewards. And that's what got me excited when I read the white paper. I was like, oh, this got it, right? This is the right approach. And it's so important right now because there's all these regulations that are coming into effect that we have a decentralized protocol that can run jurisdiction agnostic, right? And isn't located in one country or one place.
I have so many questions, but one thing I wanna maybe get to is what are you most excited about? From the smart agent side, what's an application that you think could really be kind of a game changing? Right before you joined, John, Mark, and I were talking a little bit about kind of what the intersection looks like. We have this project, MG, who is a builder in our ecosystem, launched this smart agent, I guess, if you will, for Algorand. So it's called Algorand GPT. So you can ask it all these questions specific about Algorand, and it spits out, all these like, oh, this is how you build this. This is how you deploy AlgoKit 2.0. So anyway, so I'm curious, like, what are you excited about in terms of these different applications that can be built on Morpheus?
Honestly, I think the low-hanging fruit is just the applications that are already popular in crypto and blockchain, but we can we the technical barrier and give it a chat interface, right? So we don't need to reinvent the wheel, right? We know people want to swap. We know people want to do DeFi yield. We know people want to, do all these use cases. Think of the smart agent as a wrapper on that smart contract, right? And give people a way to just talk to the smart contract, talk to Web3, right? That concept is how you get a billion people instead of just the couple million very technically savvy people that can navigate the interfaces today. And so much of it is, how do you protect non-savvy users, right? Because that's a lot of what Google did back in the day is that they took out all the phishing websites and the spam and crap, and they gave you a real sense of the best websites. And so you felt comfortable when you Googled something, oh, one of the top links, it's not going to hurt me. I can click on this, it's already been curated. And so in the Morpheus context, there's an algorithm called smart contract rank. And this is a database that's been curated by the community. That's the top blockchains, the top infrastructure, the top smart contracts. And so when somebody asks, oh, I want to do this, it knows what to recommend based on real metrics like transactions or how decentralized the infrastructure or whether it's non-custodial. And so hopefully it will not only just have information, it will have wisdom, right, that we can imbue to it about, how to safely use blockchains and DeFi and all the rest. And we can really change the narrative where this becomes something, for college kids or, tech savvy people, but something for everybody.
Very, very excited about that because I always feel that's the biggest barrier that we have as a blockchain industry is that we're still this kind of niche industry where you really have to understand in a lot of technical detail how it works. And so the ability for AI to kind of abstract the complexities of blockchain and make it accessible to my dad. So my dad can just download a wallet and just talk to the wallet and have stuff done. I think is very, very, very exciting.
David,
Yep,
how do you,
absolutely.
by the way, I love this and I agree. So I don't mean to ask a challenging question, but how do you deal with the times when LLMs or large language models maybe are hallucinate or maybe come back with the wrong thing? So I might say, hey, I want to swap X to Y, and they go, they come back with they misinterpret what I mean or whatever, right? Because they are a little bit probabilistic, right? They're not certain sometimes in their output.
Well, and the models are, you're correct, non-deterministic, right? But there's a lot of ways, and as the models get better and better, you're getting less and less of that, hallucination, if you will. But the key is the user expressing the intent. When it comes back, it's checking with the user. Oh, that's what you meant. This is the amount you expected. This is the behavior you're expecting, right? But when it comes to a smart agent itself, you can make it pretty deterministic, right? So you're building a much more narrow thing. Like, this is just a smart agent does the swaps, right? And it's only trained on these particular, APIs and ABIs, right? And so you can sort of narrow down the universe from the very generalized platform that is the model itself to a smart agent where it has a few deterministic outcomes. And so all the model really has to do is properly match what you're trying to do with the proper agent. The agent gives you the options, and it's already been tested and curated and audited, and so you feel safe with the outcomes. But ultimately, you hold the private key, and that's really the thing to understand here is the AI. No matter how smart it gets, it will never generate private keys. Right? We have thermodynamics on our side, we have physics on our side, right? And so as long as that's true, you put the human at the heart of the decision making, right? And ultimately you have a cryptographic proof. Yes, that's what I wanted to do.
And so do you envision the wallet providers like Para and MetaMask and others, do you envision them to start integrating this kind of smart agent technology into their wallets? Is that the way this goes to market?
I think it goes both ways, right? So the Morpheus community, you could download mor.org today, Morpheus client, and you can connect it to your MetaMask, and you can tell it, I want to send ETH, and it'll create the transaction, and you push the button, right? So I'm sure the wallets will eventually sort of add this chat capability, or maybe they'll integrate Morpheus and sort of all the components that it has. But I think that goes both ways, right? This is going to become very common. Like, every application, you're going to expect to be able to chat with it and talk with it. And we're very quickly getting to that point. And the infrastructure that's needed for that is sort of this compute layer, these connections and integrations. And that's sort of what the Morpheus community is focused on, is letting anybody do that, right? Because Morpheus isn't owned by any one protocol or company. It wants everybody to have agents. It wants this to be across all the chains, right? And just enable people to build what they want.
And so is there a use case, like we're talking specifically here about like how AI can actually help blockchain by abstracting all the complexities. Is there a use case for Morpheus that goes beyond it, where developers can build AI apps that take advantage of your infrastructure, and the AI apps may be doing something completely different that is not blockchain related at all? Or is it also in the context of a blockchain?
No. It's generalized, right? I mean, you look at, Eric Voorhees has been very public that he's building a uncensored ChatGPT, right? And he said he's going to announce that next month and building that on Morpheus, right? And for him, it's about generating images and generating text and giving people access to infinite intelligence, not, bottlenecked through a company or a government, right? And so that's his passion project right now, is to build something like that. And as nothing to do with DeFi use cases or wallets or any of the rest, right? It's you could be writing poems or articles or emails or whatever you want, right, with a text generator. And now you got Llama 3, you have something right there at the gold standard of sort of AI text generation. And then the image models for open source have also gotten incredible in their quality, right? So, and I expect one of the killer apps is going to be video. Right, we're already starting to see people create basic, short AI videos, and they're amazing. Right? Imagine being able to take my favorite audiobook that's never been made into a movie and turn it into an AI movie. Like, I would love that. I would do that for my kids every day as I'd make them, a special personalized movie. That's where we're headed, right? And so I think that's the top of the funnel. It's sort of those generalized use cases, and people will come for that, and they'll stick around once they realize how powerful this is and it can do all these other things for them.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think I do the same, by the way. My kid is 5 or 6. He's 6 now. It was his birthday last week. And he likes stories that include...
foundational model?
Huh?
And he built his first foundational model.
No, no. But what he does
I
like,
wouldn't expect anything less, John.
yeah. But like, well, he's smart enough, but he's not doing that yet. But what he does like is to mix and match different universes. So he wants Star Wars. He wants like Darth Vader to fight like Shredder from the Turtles, you know. And like I can try, but I'm tired after work all day. So I loved it. Like Llama 3 is very good at mixing and matching these universes for me. You know, one last thing that I think is interesting, David, that I'd love to chat with you about, and before we wrap, is censorship resistance. So this idea, you know, you've kind of alluded to it a few times. You talked about Eric Voorhees and his approach to a nonpartisan, you know, generative model. He doesn't want to be told, "Oh, sorry, that's a little bit rude. I can't help you with that poem." And so, uncensored, unbiased model is important. Also, avoiding kind of censorship of large parameter models. Maybe you know, there's legislation that's very similar to what we, you know, the cryptography in the 90s, where it was essentially classed as weapons. And so, I think maybe Morpheus will be important in terms of that, in terms of avoiding censorship of models.
Yeah, that's going to be a real issue because the executive order that was signed last October, the regulatory agencies have been putting into effect, right? So you probably saw the KYC they're introducing for data centers. So if you enjoyed KYC for your money, welcome to KYC for your data, because they're blocking all foreign people on any list that they create from accessing U.S. compute for AI. The only way to do that is institute KYC, right? And then the more draconian thing that you're referring to is the dual use determination that the Commerce Department will make before July, which is, are AI weights themselves, just the database of weights, like the open source weights, do they constitute a weapon? And they've made every indication that that's exactly what they're going to say, because we couldn't possibly let China have open source models and it'd be the end of the world and all this nonsense. But, you know, let's call it what it is. This is just regulatory capture. Right, the executive order was lobbied by OpenAI and Microsoft and Google. It's probably spent $100 million on it last year. They got it signed, and now it's being implemented. But it's all focused on companies training models, you know, companies running data centers, all these things. And so we have to go back to the Bitcoin models. You have to have a protocol that is jurisdiction agnostic. The hash power can be anywhere, right? For most of the history of Bitcoin, it was overseas. And when the Chinese decided they didn't like it, it moved elsewhere, right? That's what you need, is to separate the protocol layers so you can train a model anywhere, right? They're going to be friendly jurisdictions. The UK has said they're going to be friendly. Looks like India is turning friendly. If the EU and the US and China have kicked out all the interesting model trainers, they're just going to move overseas, right? And so people, you know, need a system where they can reach and access those systems from anywhere, regardless of where they're trained or where, you know, the actual GPU is sitting. In Malaysia or the UK, doesn't matter to me as the end user, right? And so that's the repeat of history. Like if it's crypto, it's 2014, right? And they're passing the bit license, and we all have to leave the US and discover Switzerland and Singapore and these friendly jurisdictions and rebuild the infrastructure. But clearly, you know, we're going to win in the courts, right? It just might take 5 or 10 years, right? People forget, yes, Zimmerman won in the courts by open sourcing PGP and fighting those unjust laws in the 90s. But he did that in 91. He won in the courts in 95. They didn't rescind the restrictions until 99, right? It basically took a decade to win that thing. You know, I mean, in 33, they made gold custody illegal for individuals. It took 40 years, right? It wasn't until the 70s that we got back the right to hold gold, which is obviously such a simple thing. And so, you know, people forget the timelines that are involved. You can be right, you know, and the government can remain irrational longer than you can remain alive, right? So we have to build these systems so that they work regardless of these laws, right? And that they're free and open, because most of the regulations are about intermediaries, somebody holding your data, somebody doing compute for you, you know. But if you decentralize them, people can access these systems for anywhere, and we're going to have a much more free future if we have that as an option. And so I think that's been the urgency around the community, to sort of embrace these technologies and have that as an option.
Yeah, it's very powerful ideas, and I've seen in history banning numbers doesn't work. Maybe I'm going to wrap it there, but let's go around the room real quick for final thoughts, just because we are out of time. Marc, tell me, what are you thinking?
I think it's just incredible. I mean, the opportunities, David, what you depicted and the vision that you have, I think is just super, super compelling. And I can't wait to actually see what people are going to do with your protocol and with your technology to scale this to the masses. So it's super, super exciting.
Min?
Yeah, I mean, it's so energizing. I think it's, history repeats itself, and there's a little bit. I just remember, David, when you and I chatted a while ago, I just remember coming away from that conversation feeling like there's a sense of urgency, and I still feel that having this like we're just in the beginning of this revolution, and I really kind of love the parallels that you've just drawn in terms of like it's a long battle, and we're just gonna we have to be ready for it, and we have to understand that the arc of history, where it leans, and how to like think about that, and how we make this something that is going to be used in everybody's everyday life. I just love it. Yeah, I love it.
Any call to action, David, that you have?
Just get involved, right? I look back at, when I found crypto in 2012, and, the big thing I did was download a node and learn about it, participate in the community, go to the events, go to the meetups. If you guys are going to be at Consensus, there's going to be a ton of talks about decentralized AI. I and Eric are both speaking at the AI Summit on the 31st. And so, yeah, like just get involved. Right now's the time. There's never been, a better time to build this type of technology. And the tools that, I've been involved in AI since 2011. The things that we have today are what we dreamed about, 12 years ago, and now they're real. And so, I would just say get involved, go to mor.org, join the Discord, get involved. That's the key, is just take action, and you will be so far ahead of the curve compared to your coworkers and your friends. You want to be their AI guy. You want to be their person that teaches them about this technology and brings them those benefits.
Yeah, I love it. And so go to mor.org and help David Johnston and Eric Voorhees fight the good fight against the evil that is Sam Altman and OpenAI. Just kidding. But do go to mor.org because it is very important that we democratize access to these things, and we don't allow governments to tell us what isn't weapons, especially when they're just numbers. It's been great to have you all here today. And remember, by the way, folks, if you're part of the AI ML community, you can now use Python to build on Algorand. So all you AI guys, come over and realize your vision on Algorand.
And we have a special hackathon. We have a special hackathon coming where we have a specific AI prize that we give away to projects that...
Maybe we can get them to build a smart agent on Morpheus.
That's actually a good idea. Awesome. That's actually a very good idea. We should do this. There's a special AI prize. So developers start thinking about what to do with this.
Thanks, David. We really appreciate you joining.
Glad to be here. Take care, guys.
See you, folks.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, guys.